When scanning for implant cases, the scan process is generally a two-stage scanning process. The first stage is to capture the emergence profile and proximal contacts, and the second stage is carried out with the scan flag inserted into the implant body, and the purpose of that is to illustrate to the CAD software on the lab side exactly where the implant is so that an accurate restoration can be developed. So I've already created an order form for this particular case. We have a model with two implants located within the model. So the software is asking that we provide two upper scans. You'll notice that we've got the first upper scan is available to us is enabled for scanning, and the second one at the moment is not enabled. So what it means is we cannot do the scan flag scan until we have the emergence profile scan complete. TRIOS used the term emergence profile scan for this particular scan, but realistically it's an anatomical scan. So we're capturing as much of the arch as we require for the particular case. So, as always, we aim to capture a good occlusal scan. And one of the key secrets to that, of course, is around the anterior region to make sure that we rock to capture some palatal surface and labial surface at the same time. Sweep around to the anterior region, and starting from the other side, do the same. So once we have that initial scan complete, we can review the scan, and of course in the central incisor at that site we've got a lot more detail to capture on the emergence profile, and that's fine. We'll go back and recapture that. And on this molar site we are missing some proximal contacts on both adjacent teeth. So let's go and continue scanning that. And we can approach that surface from any angle. And we want to consider, if we are scanning a patient, we want to consider the comfort of the patient, of course, and orientate the scanner to enable a comfortable scan. And we rotate slightly to capture contact points on each of the two adjacent teeth. And at this stage, the software is now asking us to mark the two teeth. So tooth number 3, we mark that position. Software automatically jumps onto tooth number 8. We mark that position. And now, and only now, after we have completed the scan and marked the two positions, does the software allow us to move on to the next stage, which is to carry out the scan flag scan. So the software is going to make a copy of the complete scan. At the exact point of where we marked the teeth, the software is going to delete out a section of the scan. At this point in the patient's mouth, we insert the scan flags. So scan flags are generally cylindrical posts which will have an indexing feature or a mating feature which will mate and engage with the fixture head. So we position the scan flags. In this case it's a taper lock system. The scan flags will generally have some flat or indexing feature on the surface. So in this case it's a cylindrical surface with a flat chamfer milled onto one side and a flat surface as well on the top. The positioning of that indexing feature for some systems is important. Sometimes it needs to be biased lingually or labially or buccally, depending what the implant system is. So it's always important to bear that in mind. Seating is really important as well. We want to make sure that the scan flag is seated appropriately, and if an X-ray is required to do that and to reassure us that we have achieved correct seating, well, that's always advisable to give us that extra level of reassurance. The risk there is that if the scan flag isn't seated correctly, if, for example, it was sitting too high by a small amount. When the scan goes through to the lab software will interpolate that the implant is sitting higher than what it should be. The CAD software is used then to design a restoration custom abutment, and the final restoration, when it goes to fitting, will then appear to sit, well, it will in fact sit that little bit lower. So accurate seating of and reliable seating of the scan flag within the implant is crucially important. So we've positioned the scan flags, and now we can go back and continue the scan. So all we need to do is position the scanner above the scan flag from an occlusal perspective, and then we roll over and attempt to capture as much of the scan flag as we can. And you can see I was applying just very subtle movements from an occlusal view. We roll over, buckle, roll over, palatal, tip backwards to see the mesial surface, tip the opposite direction to see the distal surface. If we need to approach from the side, well, that will work also. So I'll turn the colour off this scan for the moment, just so we can evaluate what we've captured. So you can see we've captured the top surface of the scan flag, this chamfered surface that I referred to, which you can see there. We are missing some detail on the side of the scan flag there and there. When we consider what's happening on the lab end, the lab software is going to take a CAD model of this exact same scan flag and attempt to align it within the CAD software. To align the scan flag, the CAD model for the scan flag with this scan information. So realistically, we have everything we need there. Even though there is some detail missing, we'd be more than happy to proceed with that. But if we wanted to go and attempt to capture a little bit more, well, of course, there's not a problem in doing that. And you can see how easy it is to capture that additional information. And now we will proceed to the central incisor. And as always, if we get to a point where we're attempting to start a scan and the software can't start with us, maybe move to a more reliable and accessible part of the scan. Again, just a subtle rotation allows us to capture the distal surface. Subtle rotation allows us to capture the mesial surface. Now we can see again, missing a small amount of detail, but realistically that's not of any major concern. We will still be able to achieve a very accurate restoration from that. And then we would complete the scan by scanning the lower model, scanning the two together in occlusion, and proceed through the normal validation strategies that we would tend to use. One consideration is, of course, if the scan flags are too long, we must remove them. We must remove the scan flags before capturing the bite scan, of course, because the scan flags may interfere with the bite. If it's a situation that you only have one scan flag, there's a tool within the software which allows us to lock a surface. So, for example, if this tooth was missing also and we had an implant located here, the strategy we would apply is that we would, and we only had one scan flag, so we had two implant sites, one scan flag. What we would do is position the scan flag in one location, and carry out the scan. And bear in mind, during the scan flag scan process, we may have ended up re-scanning some of this area here, which of course would be a fixture head. So what we would be inclined to do there is use the trim tool, delete out any scan information that's here, and under tools we have a feature to lock surface. And using the lock surface tool, then we would paint onto the scan flag, and we can maybe use a bigger paintbrush there. So I'm going to lock this area, and what locking means It means that even no matter what else happens on this surface, on this part of the scan, if we happen to scan over this area again, the software will ignore any new scan information. That allows us to remove the scan flag from this position, place it in this position, and continue the scanning. And that scan information will remain within the scan. So a very useful technique for situations where you've got multiple implants but you may not have enough scan flags to populate each implant at the same time. Another use of the scan flag, another use of the lock surface functionality is if we have gone to a stage where we've put a lot of effort into building up the emergence profile and shaping the emergence profile. Of course, when we remove the healing abutment, that emergence profile could start to collapse. So what we like to do is remove the healing abutment, scan that area straight away, paint over it using the lock surface tool, and then complete the scan. So even if the emergence profile has distorted or shrunk or collapsed, we've captured it and recorded its shape and profile at the earliest stage. Another strategy sometimes that people use is to leave the healing abutment in place. Complete the scan, and then before removing the healing abutment, delete, using the trim tool, delete that section of the scan, remove the healing abutment, and then quickly scan that area, and then if necessary lock the surface. We don't have to lock the surface all the time, but if there's a risk that the detail is going to change during the scanning process and that change will be important to us, well then we should always lock it. So I hope you felt that those were some useful tips and pointers for scanning implant cases, and I hope you get lots of practice at carrying out some successful implant scans.